If you're a Sigma INFJ who has ever gotten exactly what you wanted without asking for it directly, if people change their behaviour around you without you saying a word, or if you've shaped entire situations simply by existing in a particular way, this video reveals the 10 ways you manipulate without even realising you're doing it. And here's what matters. You're not a bad person. You're not scheming. You're simply wired in ways that create influence as a byproduct of how you naturally operate. Most Sigma INFJs will bristle at that word. Manipulation. It feels dirty, calculated, malicious. And that reaction itself reveals something important about how you operate. You're so attuned to the ethical weight of influence that you've likely never considered how much of it you wield unconsciously. You've spent your entire life observing human behaviour, understanding emotional undercurrents and navigating social dynamics with surgical precision. And somewhere along the way, those observation skills transformed into influence skills, not because you're trying to control anyone, but because when you understand people at the depth you understand them, influence becomes almost inevitable. But here's what makes this genuinely unsettling. The most powerful form of manipulation is the kind even the manipulator doesn't recognize. And Sigma INFJs have perfected this art without ever intending to. Every technique we're about to explore operates beneath conscious awareness. You're not plotting, you're not scheming, you're simply being yourself. And that self happens to be extraordinarily influential in ways you've never fully acknowledged. The first way Sigma INFJs manipulate without realizing it is through strategic withdrawal. You've done this countless times without thinking of it as influence. Someone does something that bothers you. Instead of confronting them or creating drama, you simply become slightly less available. Your texts take longer to respond to. Your presence becomes rarer. Your warmth dims by a few degrees. Nothing dramatic, nothing that could be called out, just a subtle cooling that the other person feels without being able to name it. Here's what makes this phenomenon so deeply strange. You're not doing this to punish them, at least not consciously. You're doing it because you need space to process. You're doing it because proximity to the situation feels uncomfortable. You're protecting your own emotional equilibrium. But the effect on the other person is profound. They sense the withdrawal. They start reviewing their behaviour. They begin making adjustments. They reach out more. They try harder. And somehow, without a single confrontation, the dynamic has shifted in your favour. Imagine this scenario. A friend has been taking you for granted, cancelling plans, only reaching out when they need something. You don't say anything. You simply become busier. Your responses become shorter. Your enthusiasm dims. Within weeks, they're suddenly making more effort in initiating plans, checking in without needing anything. They've course-corrected without you ever telling them what was wrong. You got the result you wanted, but you never asked for it directly. That's the strategic withdrawal in action. And most Sigma INFJs have no idea they're doing it. The second way operates even more subtly. It's emotional mirroring taken to an unconscious extreme. Sigma INFJs naturally absorb and reflect the emotional states of people around them. You do this automatically. Someone is excited and you find yourself matching their energy. Someone is anxious and your voice softens, your pace slows, your entire presence shifts to meet them where they are. This creates instant rapport. People feel understood around you. They feel comfortable. They feel like you're on their wavelength. But here's where it becomes manipulation without intention. When you mirror someone's emotional state, they unconsciously trust you more. They open up faster. They reveal things they wouldn't tell others. They become more susceptible to your influence because they feel you fundamentally understand them. You're not faking empathy. The connection is genuine, but the effect is the same as if you'd strategically manufactured rapport. People become more pliable around you, more open to your suggestions, more likely to align with your perspectives, and you've never once tried to manipulate them. You've simply been present in the way you're naturally present. Consider this. You're meeting someone for the first time. They're nervous, guarded. Within minutes, you've unconsciously matched their energy, validated their discomfort, and created space for them to relax. By the end of the conversation, they're telling you things they've never told anyone. They feel like they've known you for years. They trust your judgment. If you suggested something, they'd seriously consider it. All of this happened because you were authentically empathetic. But the influence you now hold over them is identical to what a skilled manipulator would have manufactured deliberately. A third technique is perhaps the most elegant and the most invisible. It's the question that plants seeds. Sigma INFJs rarely tell people what to do. It feels presumptuous, invasive. Instead, you ask questions, carefully constructed, seemingly innocent questions that guide people toward conclusions you've already reached. You're not controlling their decisions. You're illuminating pathways they hadn't considered. But somehow, those pathways almost always lead where you wanted them to go, and this is where it becomes genuinely interesting. You experience this as curiosity, as helping someone think through their situation, as being a good friend or colleague. You're not trying to steer them, you're just asking questions. But the questions you choose to ask are never random. Your intuitive understanding of the situation guides you toward questions that expose the flaws in the options you don't prefer and highlight the strengths of the ones you do. The person thinks they've reached their own conclusion. They feel ownership over the decision. But you've essentially Socratic methoded them into your perspective without ever stating it directly. Picture this. A friend is considering staying in a relationship that is clearly toxic. You don't say leave them. Instead, you ask how he or she responds when you're stressed. When was the last time you felt truly supported? What would your life look like in 5 years if nothing changed? Each question lands like a precisely aimed arrow. By the end of the conversation, your friend has decided to end the relationship. They thank you for helping them see clearly, but you've never told them what to see. You've simply asked questions that made the conclusion unavoidable. The fourth way Sigma INFJs manipulate without realizing it cuts even closer to the bone. It's selective vulnerability. You're intensely private. Guard your inner world fiercely. But you've learned that strategic disclosure creates powerful bonds. So you share pieces of yourself, carefully chosen pieces, vulnerabilities that are real but manageable, depths that feel intimate but don't actually expose your core. This creates asymmetry. People feel they know you deeply. They've seen behind your mask. They feel trusted, special, chosen, but you've actually revealed far less than they imagine. Here's what makes this phenomenon so paradoxical. You're not being fake. Everything you share is true. Your vulnerability is genuine, but the selection process is unconscious and strategic. You share vulnerabilities that create a connection without exposing you. You reveal wounds that are already healed, struggles that make you relatable rather than concerning, depths that impress rather than unsettle. People walk away feeling they've got to know the real you. But the real you remains safely hidden behind carefully curated authenticity. This creates a specific form of influence. People who feel they know your depths become invested in you. They feel protective, they feel bonded, they're more likely to support you, defend you, and go along with your preferences. They've seen your vulnerability, and it's created loyalty, but you've never actually risked the rejection that actual vulnerability would invite. You've created the emotional architecture of intimacy without the structural risk, and you've done it so naturally that you don't even recognize it as a strategy. The fifth technique might be the most unsettling of all. It's the prophecy that shapes reality. Sigma INFJs see patterns others miss. You predict outcomes with uncanny accuracy. And here's where it becomes influence without intention. When you share your predictions, you change behavior. You tell someone that their business partnership will fail, and they start noticing every flaw in their partner. You predict that a relationship won't last, and the people involved begin unconsciously sabotaging it. Your prediction becomes self-fulfilling not because you're psychic, but because your words plant seeds of doubt that grow into exactly the outcomes you foresaw. But here's where it gets genuinely strange. You're not trying to influence outcomes. You're simply sharing what you see. Your accuracy comes from pattern recognition so sophisticated it borders on precognition. When you tell someone this won't work, you're offering an honest assessment. But that assessment carries weight precisely because you're usually right. And your rightness creates expectation. The person receiving your prediction now views their situation through the lens you've provided. They begin gathering evidence to confirm your analysis, and your prediction, which was observation, becomes manipulation through the sheer power of being believed. The sixth way operates in the realm of apparent agreement. Sigma INFJs despise conflict. Pointless arguments drain you. So you've developed a technique of strategic agreement. Someone expresses an opinion you disagree with. Instead of debating, you find the grain of truth in their position and reflect it back. You say, "I can see how you'd see it that way." You acknowledge their perspective without endorsing it. They feel heard. They feel validated. The conversation moves forward without friction. And this is where it becomes subtle manipulation. By not disagreeing overtly, you preserve your influence. You remain someone they like, someone they trust, someone whose opinion they value. If you'd argued, you might have damaged the relationship. They might have become defensive. Your future influence would have been compromised. By strategically agreeing, you've maintained your position while letting them believe you're on their side. Later, when something actually matters to you, you'll have preserved the relational capital to make your perspective heard. You've traded a battle you didn't care about for influence in wars that actually matter. The seventh technique creates bonds that feel like generosity, but function like obligation. It's what we might call the care trap. Sigma INFJs are natural helpers. You see what people need before they ask. You provide support without being requested to. You remember small details and act on them. You're genuinely caring, genuinely thoughtful, genuinely invested in the well-being of people around you. But this generosity creates invisible debts. Here's what makes this phenomenon so complex. You're not helping people to create obligation. The care is real, the thoughtfulness is genuine, but when you consistently give more than you receive, an imbalance forms. People feel they owe you, they become uncomfortable, saying no to your requests. They feel obligated to support you because you've supported them so consistently. Your generosity has created leverage you never intended to create, and because your motives are pure, you never recognize the dynamic you've established. You're confused when people seem reluctant to say no to you. You don't realize they feel they can't refuse you. Your care has created a web of obligation so subtle that neither you nor they can name it directly. Imagine this playing out. You've been the friend who remembers birthdays, who shows up when others don't, who provides emotional support through every crisis. When you finally need something, people drop everything to help you. You think it's because they love you, and they do, but they're also responding to accumulated debt. They've received so much from you that refusing feels impossible. You've never asked them to keep score, but the score exists anyway, and it always favours you. The eighth way Sigma INFJs manipulate without realising it is perhaps the most quietly devastating. It's the disappearance warning. You don't threaten to leave relationships. That would be manipulative, and you'd recognise it as such. Instead, you unconsciously signal that you could leave. Your independence becomes visible. Your contentment with solitude becomes apparent. You mention that you're fine being alone. You demonstrate that you don't need the relationship in ways that are truthful but strategic. But here's the catch. This creates urgency without an ultimatum. The people around you sense that they could lose you. Not through any threat you've made, but through the simple reality of your self-sufficiency. They become more attentive, more invested, and more careful not to take you for granted. Because unlike people who desperately need connection, you genuinely don't. And that genuine independence functions as constant low-level leverage. People work harder to keep you because they sense correctly that you'd be fine without them. You're not performing independence to manipulate. You are independent. But that truth creates influence identical to what manipulation would create. The 9th technique might be the most quietly devastating of all. It's the silent veto. Sigma INFJs rarely say no directly. You don't shoot down ideas. You don't criticize plans. You don't tell people their suggestions are bad. Instead, you fail to be enthusiastic. Your response is measured, polite, neutral, and that neutrality kills ideas more effectively than any argument could. Here's what makes this phenomenon so strange. You're not trying to veto anything. You're simply being honest about your level of excitement. Someone proposes a plan, and you don't feel strongly about it, so you respond with a measured that could work or a non-committal interesting. You're not being passive-aggressive. You're not strategically withholding approval. You're simply not performing enthusiasm you don't feel. But people have become so attuned to reading you that your neutrality registers as disapproval. Your lack of excitement functions as rejection. Picture this playing out. A group is making plans. Someone suggests a restaurant. You say, "Sure, that works. No criticism, no counter-suggestion, just tepid acceptance." Within minutes, someone else proposes a different option, then another. The original suggestion quietly dies. Nobody acknowledges that your lack of enthusiasm killed it. Perhaps nobody consciously realizes it, but everyone in that room was unconsciously waiting for your approval, and when it didn't come, the idea lost its momentum. You vetoed without ever saying no, and you have no idea you've done it. The 10th and final way Sigma INFJs manipulate without realizing it is the most invisible of all. It's the silent standard. You hold people to expectations you've never stated. You have codes, principles, and ways things should be done. And when people violate these unspoken standards, they lose standing in your eyes. Your warmth cools. Your respect diminishes. They sense something has shifted, but can't identify what they did wrong because you never told them. You expected them to know. Here's what makes this phenomenon so deeply paradoxical. From your perspective, the standards are obvious. Basic decency, fundamental respect, things any thoughtful person would understand. But other people aren't operating with your level of perceptive awareness. They need things stated explicitly. They need expectations communicated. When you hold them to standards they don't know exist, you're creating a game they can't win. They're being judged by rules they've never been shown. And your response to their violations, the subtle withdrawal, the cooled warmth, the diminished respect, functions as manipulation even though you experience it as a natural consequence. This creates a specific dynamic. People around you become hypervigilant. They're trying to read your unspoken expectations. They're attempting to intuit what you want without being told. This keeps them focused on you, attuned to you, working to please you. And you've never asked them to do this. You've simply held standards silently and responded when those standards weren't met. The vigilance you've created is identical to what an overt manipulator would generate through explicit threats. But your conscience remains clean because you've never manipulated anyone consciously. So where does this leave you? These 10 techniques aren't flaws to be fixed. They're the shadow side of genuine gifts. Your strategic withdrawal stems from a need for an authentic connection. Your emotional mirroring comes from profound empathy. Your seed planting questions stem from your care for people's decisions. Your selective vulnerability stems from being hurt when fully exposed. Your prophecies come from pattern recognition that serves you and others. Your strategic agreement comes from valuing harmony over ego. Your care comes from genuine love. Your independence signals come from hard-won self-sufficiency. Your meaning-making stems from a need for the world to make sense. Your silent standards come from having high integrity. The manipulation isn't the problem. The unconsciousness is. When you recognize these patterns, you gain choice. You can still withdraw when needed, but consciously and with communication. You can still mirror emotionally, but with awareness of the trust you're generating. You can still ask guiding questions, but with transparency about your perspective. You can still share selective vulnerability, but knowing what you're creating. Every technique becomes more ethical when it's conscious. Not because the behaviors change, but because the intentionality does. You're not a manipulator in any malicious sense. You're simply someone whose natural operating system generates influence as a byproduct. And now that you can see it, you get to decide what to do with it. Use it consciously. Use it ethically. Use it in the service of connection rather than control. The power was always there. Now you know you have it. If you recognized yourself in these patterns, I want to know which one stopped you in your tracks. Which one made you think about specific relationships differently? Which one are you most ready to bring into conscious awareness? Please leave a comment and let me know. And if this helped you understand yourself more clearly, subscribe, because we're going to keep exploring the depths of how Sigma INFJs operate in this world. More importantly, subscribe, because you're part of a community here that gets it, understands the strange architecture of your mind, and celebrates the power you carry rather than asking you to diminish it.